First Nation. We have Chief Leonard Jackson from Saddle Lake Cree Nation, Alberta. And we have Councillor Shannon Houle for Saddle Lake Cree Nation. We have Chief Jeremy Forehorns for Pie Pot First Nation. And we have Richard Ironquill, Councillor for Pepeeksies First Nation. And we have council here that are in the back. We have our elder, Jacob Pete, that is here as well. And our councillors from Tutterchow, and we have band member reps from Palmaker as well, and Kihiu and Ken Dion.
And sorry, Chief, you have 7 First Nations represented here, is that right?
No, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and there's a few other chiefs that are supposed to be here that we don't know if they're going to show up late or what. And the first one that will be making comments here will be Chief Fox, and then successive chiefs after that. Put your phones on vibrate. Oops. Oh, and I forgot. Sorry about that. We have Vice Chief Dutch Leroy here for FSIN, who's been, been working with us, as diligently on behalf of his office here. So we want to thank Vice Chief Leroy. If you can join us at the table, sir.
Now we have 74 communities represented here.
Let us know when to start. And
oh yeah, I think everybody's ready to go.
You guys ready to go? English River Chief. The English River Chief Listener.
yeah, she is unable to. Chief Mary Black, who's the English River First Nation chief, was unable to make it, but she's in support, and she's offered up her boardroom to be used for this conference call. And Chief Derek Neepanak from Grand Chief for Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs will be doing a press conference in support of this as well today. Thanks. All right, we'll get started.
Yeah. Well, good morning. I'm here representing our Cree Nation, Onion Lake, Treaty 6, which is in Treaty 6 territory. And Onion Lake Cree Nation calls for a bilateral direct transfer agreement. It's with due diligence and careful consideration, Onion Lake Cree Nation has decided not to sign the proposed 2014-15 amended agreement. The nation invites Canada to enter into good faith bilateral negotiations funded on the spirit and the intent of Treaty Number 6. As a treaty partner with the Crown, Cree peoples have upheld their end of the deal in sharing the vast tract of land, 136,000 square miles, vested to us by Kisimanatu, our Creator, the witness to Treaty Number 6. We intend to pursue our entitlement as treaty partners on behalf of our 5,500 Onion Lake citizens. Since 1876, Canada has enjoyed the benefits of the Treaty Lagresse, which entails revenues from source extraction and the use of the Indian Trust Fund. The general public must understand the bounty harvested from the resources and the use of our lands for over 130 years with no benefit to our nations. Why should we be subject to administering our own poverty and misery through these instruments called contribution funding agreements, intended to domesticate our treaty? Treaty number 6 territory encompasses 1/3 of the current day provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan. The gross domestic product reported from national provincial systems of account point towards a very healthy income arising annually out of Treaty number 6 territory, possibly 100 billion or more a year. On the matter of the Indian Trust Fund, all monies transferred to Onion Lake, Cree Nation, and all treaty nations for capital, general administration, and essential services is drawn from the interest of these trusts, as is the entire Indian Affairs budget of their operations. The Indian Trust Fund is valued in the trillions of dollars and earns an annual interest rate of over $35 billion. No taxpayer dollars are used to pay for anything used by treaty peoples over 150 years. In fact, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled the government to turn the trust over to the trustees selected by treaty peoples. The government refuses to act on that ruling. While Canada's Indian Act violates the Canadian Constitution, international law, and the rule of law, in fact, the Canadian state does not have legal title to this land, nor legal sovereignty within the borders known as Canada. Onion Lake Cree Nation sends this message to the government: adhere to international law regarding treaty, recognize Indigenous title to land, recognize Indigenous sovereignty over the land, and cease and desist with the social engineering project known as Indian policy. Onion Lake Cree Nation has submitted a written response expressing concerns with the contents of the funding and outstanding unresolved issues from 2013 and 14. Amending agreement that it has signed under duress, a position that the arrangement has no legal force or effect. Onion Lake Cree Nation calls for a direct bilateral transfer entitlement agreement between government to government treaty relations. We have recently had a number of general meetings in our community and were given the mandate not to sign the amended agreement by our membership within our territory. And this is the purpose of this conference call. And out of respect and autonomy, I wish not to speak for the rest of the chiefs here, my colleagues. But this is Onion Lake's position at this point in time. We will not sign this amended agreement until such time as the appropriate departments come to the table and sit with us. Thank you.
Chief Wayne?
Good morning. As the chief of the Little Pine Cree Nation, we are here to support all our Treaty 6 First Nations in this push. It is time for the Government of Canada to step up to the table and work respectfully with us. Indian Affairs has no mandate to deal on any of these issues, so certainly, according to the Constitution that Government of Canada follows, they have that obligation to step up and deal directly with the First Nations. They should not be sending their bureaucrats anymore to come and deal on bureaucratic matters, but deal on government-to-government basis. And certainly as a chief of my community, I support every other treaty band in Saskatchewan, Treaty 6, to come to the table and support this cause.
On behalf of Thunderchild First Nation, we've had our General Assembly meetings with our elders and our youth, and unanimous support in regards to not signing our funding agreement. I want to thank my council for being here. I also want to thank the chiefs from Treaty 4 who are sitting with us, as well as the reps and the chiefs from Alberta who are here. We can't continue to agree to administer poverty within our communities. We hear of the great announcements by the Premier, Brad Wall. And how are we to benefit? How are we to support, you know, the bounty that he keeps talking about here in Saskatchewan, if we're going to continue to be subjected to arrangements that impoverish our people? We are forced and told by INAC through Anna Fontaine, the RDG, that they're going to put a call out, a tender, to get a third party to come and run Thunderchild. Well, when we did our audit and submitted it and presented it to our people, it was an unqualified audit, and we turned our deficit situation into a positive. And yet, unilaterally, as they do with the contribution agreements that they develop without consultation and due diligence to First Nations leaders, they're just going to unilaterally impose a third party to a community, to a First Nation. For what? Where there's no money, they have no problem paying whatever contract amount is to a third party member. Whether it's $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, but yet they take issue to the salaries that chief and councils get, but they have no problem paying that out. They have no problem with the underfunding in housing and so on and so forth, but yet they have no problem, according to legislation, to unilaterally put a third party in. We don't need third party in our communities. What we need is that bilateral process where we're sitting across face to face in good faith to come up with what's going to work. We're tired of being poor. We have resources within our communities that are controlled by government. We develop our monies in oil, gas, land, and so on and so forth that go to our trust funds, both the capital and revenue. We have to go big, hat in hand, for our money. And they decide when they're going to release it to us. That's why we cannot agree in Thunderchild First Nation to sign the 14-15 agreement. Because basically what we're agreeing to poverty. We're agreeing to something where the government, where the minister has enhanced powers, but yet is indemnified of any wrongdoing to our communities. Well, that's not how accountability and responsibility work. And yet the Conservative Party, Conservative government, ran big on accountability. Well, they should be accountable to us as well. We're people, and we matter.
The other thing, when we met with Minister Valcourt, Chief Wapas reminded me of the transparency and accountability on the legislation that have imposed on First Nations people. I called on Minister Valcourt at the meeting in Edmonton last fall. What's the difference between your government and our government? The series of exercises that Onion Lake undertakes with our general membership, we go line by line by line on all departments, including chief and council salaries and expenses in our nation. And any budget that is required from our nation, from the Capital Trust, has to be presented to our people and endorsed by our people through a vote and a motion at the floor of the general meeting. I called Minister Valcourt on that. When you get into Parliament and when you're going to be addressing the budget for the next fiscal year on behalf of Canada and parliamentarians, I said, Mr. Valcourt, do you go back to your constituency and do you ask all your constituents, this is the budget that we are going to be presenting, what are your thoughts? Do you consult with your constituents? No, you don't. We do that. Well, now which government is transparent, which government is accountable? We are. And to impose this kind of legislation, we are not going to put up with this. We are a sovereign people, and we have never relinquished that sovereignty. The infamous Indian Act created all of this distrust and this chaos and confusion at the time of treaty, nobody explained to our people that there was an Indian Act that was developed in Ottawa that was going to erode and eradicate every single treaty that was entered in with the Crown.
Chief Jackson, Saddle Lake.
Good morning. Just take places with Chief Samatters.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to say good morning to all of you. I'm thankful that, we've come together to discuss and create some uncertainty for the federal government in terms of addressing the issue at hand. Saddle Lake is no stranger to what is happening here today. We've gone through this experience back in 1999, 2000. There are so many questions wrapped around these agreements that are imposed unilaterally. There is no involvement of First Nations to the creation and design of and the implementation of these agreements. There are many issues that we identified within this agreement, and currently we are in the process of continuing our negotiation on the from last year's agreement. When I hear about our First Nation brothers who are having a difficult time in terms of addressing these agreements, my heart goes out to them. And I want to do what I can to support anyone who has troubles trying to move this mountain forward. On the one hand, the federal government dictates to us that there's no other way around this issue. There's a lot of distrust between us and the federal bureaucracy and the government it serves. Currently, I'm fully aware of 1, 2, maybe 3 First Nations that are not going to enter into their agreements. Kudos to them. Because on the one hand, the federal government can't even tell you, or the bureaucracy itself, whether or not these instruments that we enter into are legally binding or are they just administrative. When Bill C-38 and 45 were passed, many of us had issues and concerns wrapped around the agreements that reflect the Canadian law. Yet Saddle Lake received a letter from the PMO's office informing Saddle Lake that Bill C-38 and 45 would not have an effect or impact the agreements going forward. But that's very questionable, because within the agreements lies a clause that determines which laws apply depending on the province or the territory that you live in. There's been injustice right from day one. And when we come together in this fashion, rest assured, the dominant society and the media will play it off as rogue bands, as Saddle Lake has been identified as such back when we decided not to enter into agreements. There has to be a real demonstration on the part of the federal government to come to the table and have the people that sit at this table involved in the design and implementation of these agreements. No more unilateralism. It has to stop. Thank you.
Chief Larry Kashane, Yellow Quill First Nation.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. First of all, I'd like to thank the chiefs involved for setting up the conference today to let people know what's going on in our communities, the underfunding that we see. And then that's at the whim of our Department of Indian Affairs, where they decide that, well, we need new contribution agreements, and those contribution agreements usually mean less funding for our communities. You have responsibilities falling on our table that are added. You have programs like the Active Measures program that's coming back to our community, where we're training our youth, 18 to 24-year-olds. We take a cut in our funding in the Active Measures program, and they want us to do more with less. And that's what the funding agreements do usually. The agreements are usually last minute. We get word 2 weeks from the time that new monies are gonna come out. Well, you have to sign your funding agreement. And those are, we're never given enough time to review our funding agreements. And a lot of the times, the policies that are being developed aren't developed yet. So we'll know in May or June what the policies are that are driving the cuts, and the new policies on funding are known to the First Nations until months after they've signed, or months after the April 1 has come and gone. So it's always an unknown. They're asking us to sign documents that we're not aware of all of the details on it, so it's not fair for our communities to be signing funding agreements when there's too many unknowns for our communities and the burdens that are there. You know, taxpayers talk about First Nations people getting all this money. I know in my community I have 2,800 band members, and we have a budget that's set, and it gets smaller every year. If we were to take the actual cost, our post-secondary, we spend $1 million in post-secondary. That's off of the budget line already. We spend probably close to $2 million in teacher salaries, so you take that off. Now you're left with half a budget. You divide that by 2,800 members, and that's a little over $1,200 per member. If we're gonna take those costs and try to run a government and to try and provide services to 2,800 people, that's not a lot of money. So I'd like to be, I guess, mention that I am from the Treaty 4 territory, and that we have Chief Mike Kuchikam that's battling the government now by not signing his funding agreement down south. So my purpose and intent here is to come and show my support to the communities that are not willing to sign. So thank you for the opportunity to come and speak, and I think we need to let the Canadian public know what's going on, who is accountable to their communities. Chief Fox talked about our meetings, our yearly meetings, presenting our audits to our members. We've done that for the last 6 years at Yellow Quill, where we have a band meeting, we present our finances, and we let the band membership know exactly what's happened the year before. So, and we've yet to see anything come out of the government here in Canada that shows that they are being responsible, what kind of deals are being made, and at what expense. You know, you take the things happening in New Brunswick and the dangers that are tied to activity there, and it's in the name of taking resources out of the ground. So at whose expense? First Nations and the Canadian general public. So I think Harper needs to define what accountability means to his government, not only to the First Nations. So thank you.
Chief Jeremy Forehorns, Pipeline.
And just for information purposes, Pipeline is in Treaty 4 territory, and our community and council have ongoing frustration with the current funding, the current contribution agreement that we have been offered. And because of the same reasons, there are a lot of questions that we asked, that we have, and the Department of Indian Affairs, which is now known as Aboriginal Affairs, couldn't give us the answers. So on numerous times, we had asked to meet with the decision makers of these agreements, because the funding services officer, even the regional director general, cannot make decisions when it comes to changing these agreements. So we need to build a relationship, because we need to stop pretending that we have a working relationship with the Department of Indian Affairs and or the federal government of Canada. The current direction that we're all headed towards doesn't lead to a constructive future. 1 year ago today in Treaty 4 territory, we had one community that had issue with the contribution agreement and made that decision not to sign it. And now you look here today, and there are more. And it's only going to continue to grow in numbers as we move forward. One of the challenges that a lot of other communities have is access to financial resources. If more communities had their own financial resources that were ready available, then you would see more communities sitting here, and we would need a bigger room. Because, as I said, these contribution funding agreements, they're not agreements, they're one-sided proposals. And no changes can be made to the proposals. And we're never given any reason as to why. We're always there. We're open to that dialogue and that discussion. How can we improve things? But when you're told that these things are going to change, but we can't tell you how they're going to change, we don't know what that's going to look like, because we haven't heard from headquarters in Ottawa, so we don't have any idea what that's going to be. It's frustrating. It's just a very frustrating process. And going forward, as we try to plan the long-term planning of our community in Pipot, it's going to get harder and harder, because Pipot as well has 2,300 members, and we try to be accountable to them all, because we have our budget meetings as well, we have our audit presentations, and we jump through all the hoops that the department and that the federal government of Canada requires us to. And when we ask a simple question of how can we improve things going forward, we're never given an answer. It's never a simple answer. So for us, it's very frustrating, the amount of funding that we received cuts to this year. And we put our own resources to fill those gaps, which we should. And I can guarantee you that if we had the same level of funding on a per capita basis that Canada deals with, any First Nation would balance that budget year after year after year. There would be no deficits in Canada. That's a guarantee because of how we have to operate now. We're managing very minimal budgets right now, and yet we have to meet that balanced budget year after year. So that's something that we know that we have that experience in moving forward, and all this other stuff that the department and the government of Canada says to us that, you know, we're working with First Nations to improve the outcomes. That's basically smokescreen to us. Until we see that reality in our communities on the ground, then we can say, well, things are getting better and things are starting to improve. But at the present time as it sits, that isn't happening. In Pipot First Nation, when we had the discussion with department officials on the agreement, and when they couldn't provide that clarity, we said, well, we are not interested in signing it right now because we need to have some of our questions answered. So we need to meet with the decision makers, the ones that you report to. And so they set up a meeting with us. And then when that date came, we got excuses for why it couldn't happen. But that didn't change the date of this deadline that they gave us, to say that if you don't sign this agreement, then no funds will flow April 1 to your community, not even essential services. So when we talk about our school and the teachers that come out to provide an education to our children, they wouldn't be paid. When we talk about the service people that provide the infrastructure services to our community, like our water treatment plant operators and those technicians, they would not be paid. You know, all of these things put us in a situation where we're between a rock and a hard place. And it's frustrating for us to continue to operate in a manner that, as has been previously said before me, we're just managing poverty. And on the one hand, it's good to see communities moving forward like this, that enough is enough, basically. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time.
Councillor Richard Ironquill, Pepeeksies First Nation.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Ironquill. I'm a headman from Pepeeksies Cree Nation. Pepeeksies started this fight against the CFA, the Contribution Funding Agreements, a year ago today, this month. And it's been a long battle, and it's really good to see the numbers growing in support of standing against Harper government. The unilateral, you know, decisions to force these agreements on us it makes it difficult for anybody to operate with such little bit of budgets, such small numbers to work with, and we're just we're sick and tired of it, of being told not being able to participate in a negotiation on our funding agreements. We're the only people in the world that have laws telling us how we run our operations. We're the only people in all of the world that have telling us who our members are, who our people are, where we have to live, how we have to live, how we acquire assets. It's all determined by the Department of Indian Affairs. That is not fair in any part of the world. No other people would ever allow that on their people, to let that happen to them without a war. Holding back funds is considered an act of war. When they hold back our money, I consider that an act of war on our people, because they're trying to starve our people. The Department of Indian Affairs is the only department I see that has a mandate to eradicate its own department. The Minister of Fisheries does not make laws to get rid of fish. The Department of Forestry does not make laws to clear cut the whole entire forest. But our Department of Indian Affairs has a policy to get rid of the First Nations people. Now is the time, as people, we have to stand up and fight against these people, and fight against this INAC, and tell them enough is enough. We're sick and tired of being poor. We're sick and tired of being this low on the scale. When Canada is third in the world in trading and resources, yet our people live, you know, near the bottom of that scale of poverty and economics. Why is that? Why do we have poor housing? Why do some of our reserves don't even have running water? Why do our schools get run down to a condition where we can't sustain them anymore, because we have no funding? The funding levels are a third of what they are off reserve. And that's why we stand up for this. And that's why we have to pull together. As First Nations people right across Canada, I see the numbers growing. Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan are all coming together. And it's good changes. And with that, we build strength, and we also build, you know, courage for our people to stand up and know the time is now to stand together. So,
One final comment from Chief Fox, and then we'll go into question and answer.
Thank you, colleagues. One of the things, and I know as media, you're going to be editing this, and I've said this many times over in press conferences, but this part never is reported to the general public. At the time of the treaty making, our people were a sovereign entity. It can take two nations, sovereign entities, to enter into a treaty. Our people had that sovereignty. The crown that came across the water had that sovereignty. I use this analogy, equal sovereigns. That's how the treaty-making process happened over here on Turtle Island. Now, we never relinquished that sovereignty. When you look at common sense and history and what the elders have told us, why, when we had everything to sustain ourselves at that time, Why would our ancestors, our leadership, and our spiritual warriors give up everything to have nothing? The compassion in the heart and the love that they had for the future, which we are the future, that they prayed about. This is not what they wanted. This may seem it's all about money. It's not about money. It's about unfinished treaty business and the violation of that sacred treaty that was entered into with the Crown. And in 1982, when the Constitution came to be in Canada, they accepted that responsibility on behalf of the Crown to maintain those peace and friendship treaties. We maintained our role, our part. But we never agreed, our ancestors never agreed to the state of conditions that the people are living with today. At that time, there was a sovereign relationship. They wanted to come and live on this land. Our elders and our spiritual warriors, our leaders, entered into a treaty. Right from that time, they've devised this termination policy, and that's what's happening today. 135 years later, it's still happening today. They've used many different forms. If you recognize that sovereignty, treaty trumps Canadian law. And we've been told this by deputy ministers in different governments in the department. Treaty trumps law. And that's the relationship. It's a treaty relationship. What is happening today, they've been pushing us underneath the Canadian system. In this position, it's not about money. It's about recognizing that sovereignty and that relationship that we had and we never relinquished. As far as we're concerned, we're going to continue to make that journey, to make that a parallel relationship with the Crown as it was in Treaty Number 6 in 1876. It was a sovereign relationship. We never relinquished that. It took two sovereigns to enter into a treaty. Treaty trumps law, Canadian law. Thank you very much.
Chief Dwayne, just quickly before we get into question and answer.
Good morning, everybody, elders that are here, and all the chiefs. I can only speak on my own band. That's Palmaker Cree Nation. We're a band, custom band. We make our own laws on the reserve. I'm probably the only one that signed a funding agreement this year. I signed it because I was under duress, because we needed our funding based on our operations. Yes, we have budget cuts, but we have to keep moving on. I support all the chiefs today. That's why I'm here today. We have to go back to the table with the federal government. It's not Indian affairs. Indian affairs are only the spokespeople for the federal government. We have to sit with Stephen Harper. This is the same thing that happened back in 1885 during our rebellion days. Our people got their rations, everything taken away. That's why there was an uproar. For Palmaker anyway. I can only speak for Palmaker. With that, chiefs, I'm going to continue supporting you guys from 1 to 11. Thank you very much.
Question and answer. I just want to acknowledge Chief Okamau that came here from Lucky Man. I want to acknowledge you, Chief. So, question and answer.
Yeah. The only just for microphone purposes.
Well, we can switch the way we.
Sure. Well, one question first. As far as the assembled First Nations here, how many First Nations are not going to be signing the agreement, and how many are sort of here in support? I mean, just so I make sure I get my.
I think I'll start off answering and then move it on here. I think the point that needs to be made is that there was one that didn't sign last year and the rest that signed under duress, right? Which was Pepixies. Now today we have more than one band and it's growing, right? So the First Nations you have here, Thunderchild First Nation did not sign. March 31st, we're not gonna have an agreement at all, right? Yet we qualify for a 4-year agreement based on our general assessment from Indian Affairs, right? But the bottom line is that we have other First Nations that have been forced, to sign under duress. Chief Fox?
Last year, as I said in the earlier comments, we signed under duress also. This year, the mandate given to us by our membership was do not sign this amended agreement. And like many of the chiefs earlier spoke, we met with some of the senior bureaucrats. We met with the deputy minister last year. We met with the Minister of Indian Affairs. What happens if Onion Lake doesn't sign next year? We'll put you the third party. We have unqualified audits galore for many, many years in our community. How can you justify that? You have no legal basis and mandate. They don't have a dispute mechanism process. We called them on that last year. They reinstated our funding because there is no process at that time. To answer your question, are they going to put Onion Lake in third party? I welcome that challenge to the federal government. Bring it on. They are not going to push Onion Lake Cree Nation around anymore. You hear the frustration in my voice. The time has come for those people in Ottawa that have been deciding our fates, our futures for the last 135 years. The day stops here. They have to come to the table, and they will.
And Chief Fox, just so I'm clear, because I'm certainly no expert on treaty or anything, but I mean, try and sum up exactly what it is about this agreement that's basically making you not want to sign it.
Basically, it's talked about earlier by many of the colleagues. They are still telling us what to do. They are still defining these budgets without consultation, without understanding the needs of our people. There's legislation that they're imposing and developing. By signing these agreements, you're pre-agreeing to any of those like that. Who the heck would you want to agree to something like that as an individual? This is what we're being forced to do. They're arbitrarily designing these and these documents to that effect. By us entering into these agreements, if they change the legislation between now and next fiscal year, that is going to, again, detract from the position we're in with treaty and violate that position, by signing this agreement, we're pre-accepting and pre-approving anything.
Can you give us an example of the kind of pre-agreement that you're making? What are the give us some examples of the kind of thing you agree to and they'll tell you down the line.
Example, First Nation Education Act. If we had signed this last year, which we didn't, we filed notice a week, 10 days in advance on March 18th to the federal government that we are not going to, we're asserting our rights as a sovereign entity. Legislation was passed on March 28th. Okay, these funding agreements now have to be consolidated audits, etc., etc., etc. We will provide our consolidated audit to our membership. The INAC funded programs will provide that audit to the federal government. Because it's the people in Onion Lake that we work for, and it's their resource that we're using on all our companies and business entities. Until Valcourt can demonstrate, and Harper, how much money they put in this business and that business of their federal money, you have absolutely no business in what we're doing. That's one example. The second part of this example is that education legislation. That wasn't part of this last year. Now, we're agreeing to this by signing on to this agreement. That's a policy legislation because it affects our education budgets. And this is the streamlining effect that it's going to have, that the federal government is wiping their hands of all liability in education. This is in their information. This is coming from their documentation. They're transferring all that responsibility to provincial entities. all the curriculum, developing salaries, anything pertaining to education is going to the provincial entities. Now, that's in that agreement. That's a policy change and a legislative change. By agreeing to this, we're agreeing to that.
Just further, in the agreement, it talks about the enhanced authority of the minister and his agents, his or her agents. So you have the minister who, through these agreements, or arrangements is what they call them now, that he has the ultimate authority to do whatever. But yet, he's indemnified. There's an indemnification clause in there that he saved, that the minister and his agents and the crowd, the government, is saved harm of any wrongdoing. Well, what if they appoint a third-party manager or an expert resource and they come and mess up our community? Who do we go after then? Who do our people hold accountable? Nobody, because that's what the agreement says. You've signed on to that. The other is that if they appoint a third party into a community, that third party has has the authority from government to go ahead and sign agreements, arrangements, and so on and so forth, binding the First Nation to whatever. So government, naturally, they're going to appoint a third party manager to come in. In Tenachaw's situation, take for example, they appoint a third party manager to come into Tenachaw. Third party manager then signs a 14-15 agreement. It's binding, according to their legislation, according to their law. Is that fair? Right? So you have these agreements. Does the Alliance Energy have to submit their audit? You know, who is an ABEX winner here in business? Do they have to submit their audit to the federal government before the federal government transfers money to the province? Absolutely not. But why are First Nations expected to submit their audits, asked to do a consolidated audit on a business, on their businesses, when you've used no dollars of INAC money to create those businesses? When no other company in Canada is expected to do that. So why is it different rules for First Nations people? Why? Because the more government knows the amount of money you're making, the less they're going to give you. Well, the more they know that the province is making, why don't they give them less? So there's a lot of different points within the funding agreement that is unilaterally made by Canada. And we're expected to sign it to administer poverty.
Just to clarify, I've heard amending the agreement and contribution agreement. Is this the same? Are you talking about the same thing? And this is your primary source of revenue from the federal government?
Well, my understanding is that First Nations are given a multi-year agreement. Some are year-to-year, but they're still contribution agreements. Those that are in multi-year agreements have amendments to their agreement. And it's those amendments where those changes are in, and you're expected to sign it. Right?
So what will this mean?
As an example in this,
Sure.
you're entering into a lease agreement on a vehicle, as an example. You agree to certain conditions on that lease for the duration of that lease, which is 3 years. And you're in year 2 of that lease, and this company that you're leasing from arbitrarily changes. Okay, I'm going to increase this rate, I'm going to increase this lease agreement, the payments, it's everything. Would you agree to that? When you agree to the initial agreement over here, and they arbitrarily change it in year 1 and 2, that's the same example as this that was agreed on over here. Now they're changing this. And we're because many of our nations rely on this funding, they're forced to sign under duress, accepting those amended changes.
So not signing this, what does it mean for your communities as far as funding for services and?
We've already considered that. That's some of the discussions through our membership. We have Plan B. We'll take care of our own people. That's all government needs to know. Our people have asked us that same question. So we're not going to disrupt the livelihood of our people when this time comes. Who knows, a day may come on April 1st that Onion Lake may not take a dime. Then what? That's what I said to government, the minister. What if Onion Lake doesn't take a dime? Not sign the agreement and not take a dime. What happens then? What kind of control do you have over Onion Lake? Where's the relationship? Where's the control? Because that's how they've controlled First Nations for many, many years. Come March, they make the First Nation, it's legalized extortion. And I've said that last year. State-sanctioned extortion of their policy. Either you sign or you starve.
So do you have enough own source funding, you know, to keep the services going, kind of thing?
According to our membership in our people's mandate the other day in Onion Lake, like we have 3-4 days of budget day after day exercises. We've outlined all of those resources. And after they felt comfortable, they said, Chief, do not sign. Council, do not sign this agreement. We're going to look after when that time comes.
For us in Bilateral, and for many, it's a sense of empowerment, right? We're not allowing government to think that they can go ahead and do what they want without somebody standing up and saying, hey, enough's enough. And it's not a matter of, are we in a position to do that? Financially, do we have enough money to do that? We have nothing. Our people are impoverished. Our housings, our situations in most of our community is third world, fourth world. So it's not a matter of, what are we expecting on April 1st? Canada has a responsibility. What is Canada going to do? That's the question that needs to be asked to Canada. What are you going to do with the First Nations people? Are you going to impose third party? Are you going to impose, sanctions because they didn't sign? When you didn't sit down with them? When they've been open, to have a bilateral discussion? Right? So it's something that principally and honorably we have to do. Because in order to get that respect and that recognition, we have to unfortunately force it. And that's what we're going to do.
What would it take what would the government have to do to get, to negotiate and for you guys to sign?
Quit lying to different First Nations. They tell one First Nations one thing, they go to another First Nation and they lie to them. And then they go over here and the story changes. And then the story changes over there. Be consistent. What's there to lie about? Right? Do they think we not talk? Do they think that we do not communicate amongst each other? We have social media. We have an assembly of FSIN where our chiefs come together, they visit, they talk, they dialogue, and they hear the stories. Star Blanket was told, no, we're not going to agree to your submission. On the same submission Pepixis makes, they agree with Pepixis. They tell the chief up north that, everybody signed, you're the only one that didn't sign. Yet here we are, right? So there's these games that are going on at the expense of our little children and those that aren't born yet and our elderly, right? That has to stop, and we're here to stop it.
Chief, I just want to know, do you feel that First Nations will be united across the country and in the province?
We feel that there is unity. Look at here. The Pepixis was one band last year. Look at us now. And in Alberta, we have chiefs from Saddle Lake. We have chief from Samson Cree Nation that was supposed to be here, Chief Kirk Buffalo. We have another chief, Chief Adam, way up north in Alberta. We have Manitoba, that Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs are going to do a press release outlining their chiefs that didn't sign. So it's picking up. So either deal with it now, or deal with it when it gets a lot bigger.
And do you think it can work if not all First Nations are united? Or
Excuse me?
do you think it could work even if not all First Nations are united behind your position?
Of course.
You think it can still work even if?
Yeah. In the long run, it's going to benefit of the First Nations. We need to realize and respect that many of the First Nation, as was outlined earlier, that have signed under duress, were to have no recourse. They're forced to sign these agreements. So by us assisting and pushing the process to get that sovereign relationship recognized, we wouldn't be sitting here. Even the 1930 natural resource transfer agreement, no First Nation chief was ever asked and consulted, will you give those rights up? Because in the time of treaty, they never relinquished those rights underneath the law. So look at that in 1930, the federal government transferred those responsibilities to the provinces. And look at the wealth Manitoba, Saskatoon, Alberta have generated from that. And how much of that wealth went to First Nations people? If they had sat down with our people, we wouldn't be sitting here today to talk about these things. Because those would be the rightful players sitting at the table as part of that agreement.
Could this end up going to court?
What the government will want to do is they will want us to go to court. Because they have the vast amount of money and legal arm and the legal machine. We have something they don't have.
Just further on that point, is that it was published here not too long ago, where it talked about the amount of money that Indian Affairs has spent fighting First Nations people. And we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And that there is public knowledge, right? So they have no problem, taking whatever money they don't have and then starving us out on nominal roll and so on and so forth. Further, back to the question of unity, right? Just because First Nations aren't here, in numbers, right? 633 First Nations aren't here from Canada, doesn't mean that there's no unity. When you have Indian Affairs, Anna Fontaine, that's telling people on behalf of the Minister of Indian Affairs that if you don't sign, right, even though you have an agreement, you're not going to be entitled to your capital. You're not going to be entitled, to the proposal-driven dollars that are there. Some people are midstream in regards to their capital projects. Some people have been waiting for a long time to have a water treatment plant within their communities. Where does that leave them? But does that mean that they're not with us? Absolutely not. They're here.
So just in terms of governments and the relationship with that, and it's been a bit testy maybe with the current government, is this government any different than all governments, or is there something that's different about this government with First Nations that's causing these problems in the relationship?
The government, many years ago, I've been around for 30 years in leadership. Many years ago, I was privy to some documents in headquarters in Ottawa. They have a 25-year plan of how they're going to deal with the Indian policy. And these are senior people that have told me this, that I met with when I was 25 years old. Regardless of which party is in government, this bureaucrat arm of Indian Affairs will implement this policy. So it does not matter which party. They are still going to follow that. And that 25-year policy expired in 2000. Now there's another one. I haven't been privy to see that. Doesn't matter.
Just adding to that, there was the termination policy and plan that was put in place, and we all heard about the 6-9 white paper, right? And every successive government has been operating from that termination plan. I have not heard a denouncement from the Prime Minister of that plan, and nor have I heard a denouncement of Justin Trudeau to denounce the 6-9 paper that his dad was party to, right? And the NDP. Where's that denouncement? So, are they all part of this plan? Well, until I hear otherwise, I have to say yes.
The federal government spent over $100 million fighting us. Does Canadian public know that? Our own money was used to fight us on all fronts. I believe Chief Jackson, Chief Counsel said.
I believe for in response to your question, as long as this government and any other government before this one continues to have amnesia in not embracing and accepting the facts based on history, I think you heard Chief Wallace Walks, we will never move forward. If there is no acknowledgement by this government to listen on what was told by our ancestors to us in terms of treaty, we will never move forward. There is no reason why any one of us here should be administering our own poverty. We shouldn't be knocking on that door, asking for money for housing, asking additional monies for educational services. There was a treaty. There is a treaty. And until that government, this one and the one to come, changes their attitude and quit being racist and discriminatory towards First Nations, only then will we see a change. But to do that, it requires the strength of those that are sitting at this table and those that want to be here but are unable to be here, to push the envelope further. As far as you know, your question, or whether your first question in relation to when did this begin, and regarding non-signing of agreements, I think this government has brought the attention of these agreements with the passing of certain legislation. But like I said earlier, for Saddle Lake, we've made this stand long before. And do you think government listens? No. Because those of us that sit around this table are deemed to be wasteful spenders of the taxpayer's dollar. And I went to Ottawa based on two questions. You tell me exactly how much of this funding that Saddle Lake receives is based on your legal, moral, and constitutional obligation to provide. On the other hand, you can tell me how much is the discretionary funding. For that amount, you can hold me accountable. For this amount, sorry. Sorry. You can't hold me accountable for what you are constitutionally, legally, and morally required to provide. Do you think I'd get an answer? No. Am I going to continue pushing? Yes. We need someone out there who has good listening skills, An elder once told me to hear me is passive activity, to listen requires movement from the heart. And I'll leave it at that.
Take, for example, Seneschal First Nation has money in their trust, right? Our money, not INAC's money, not INAC's contributed money into our business. We created this business with our own source. Now we want to get our money. We've submitted a band council resolution, which is part of this journey, I guess, the process, to apply for our money. Now government decides when they're going to sign to release our money. We waited up to 6 months. Onion Lake waited up to a year for their own money. Why should the minister be deciding when we should get our own money? Right? What authority? Why should he have that responsibility? Yet, the general public out there believes that, why are the Indian people complaining? How come they're looking for handouts? The taxpayer is always complaining. Well, hey, we complain just as much as the taxpayers do. We're taxpayers as well. But if you put your money in trust, does government decide when you go pull your money out of that trust? Absolutely not. Why don't you ask the minister that? How come you're making First Nations people beg hat in hand for their own money, which you provided no dollars into their business for? And further, why are you making them provide you an audit, which you guys have contributed no dollars to? Then maybe we can be part of that bounty and that, that Brad Wall talks about. Because our people go to Timmy's. Our people cheer for the Canadian Olympics, our Olympians. Our people wake up in the morning, they go to work. They drive their kids to school just like everybody else. But the rules aren't the same for us. So the challenge is for people to educate themselves in regards to how government legislation that they've created is to terminate the Indian.
The other part of this, late ma'am, when you asked the question, the Governor General of Canada, the Honourable Johnson, has a very significant role to play. This is coming from the elders understanding, because it was the Governor General that represented the Queen in the treaty-making process. The Governor General today has a responsibility to maintain the honor of the Crown. And the Constitution of 1982, this is what it says also. You must maintain the honor of the Crown. And that's the relationship that our people, our elders, and many of them have passed into the spirit world, have fought for many, many years. I sit with these elders over and over again in the different treaty areas. They're 70, 80 years old. They've been at this for 50, 60 years, many of them. The Governor General has the power to prorogue the government. Correct? Shall Jean prorogue the government? Mr. Johnson, why do you think there's lieutenant governors in every province? Before any law is passed, man-made law has to have royal assent. So there is still a direct relationship to the Crown. There is an indivisible Crown. The provincial and the federal are one and the same. That lieutenant governor in the provinces, and then there's the Governor General, they have to give royal assent in passing these laws. So there's other avenues that we're contemplating from our nation to look at, is to hold the Governor General's role and responsible, to bring that to the forefront. When you asked what will it take, I met with the Governor General and Chief Spence requested a meeting. Chief Spence asked me to speak at that meeting at the Governor General's residence. I had a private sidebar with the Governor General. Chief Fox sent me a letter of invitation. I will come to Treaty 6. I will meet with the elders that have requested my presence. He sent a letter. It didn't come back. Outright lied to me in my face. They have a very serious responsibility. This is the relationship to meet with the Governor General with the Treaty 6, Treaty 4 territory. Begin that, revisit that relationship that was entered into with the Crown. And then Canada said they will take this responsibility on in 1982. Then the different ministerial departments that hold all these resources will have to come to that table on behalf of our people. That's how this relationship should have been, and that's how they wanted this relationship to be, not be subject to this process.
Take one more question.
So when we get down to kind of specifics, you know, when you're gonna sign the contribution agreement, like you think that any amendment to that agreement, you know, the government shouldn't be able to arbitrarily come and say, oh, we're amending this next year and here are the new rules, kind of thing.
Well, if you're given a multi-year agreement, and you're told you qualify for a multi-year agreement, and you sign on that multi-year agreement, that's basically you're locked into that agreement. Oh, by the way, you know, we made changes, you know, after year one. So here's an amendment. And if you don't sign your amendment, you're not getting your funding. Or may provide you essential services, health, education, welfare, but you're not entitled to capital or proposal-based funding. There's always one way or another where they try to, you know, force you, you know, to sign, right? And that's how government's operated, right?
And so when you're negotiating for these contribution agreements, you want more of an equal footing and less, you know, arbitrary action and
well, justification. Like let's sit down here. Let's really hammer out what the problem is here, right? Don't come to us and say, by the way, First Nations, you're entitled to $6,500 per student, but we're going to give the French immersion $18,000 a student. Or in Thunderchild's situation, here's $6,500 a student. 13 kilometers away in Turtleford, you're getting, you know, $8,500, right? But don't mind that. You know, just continue signing your agreement. Come audit time on nominal roll. This student doesn't qualify, that student doesn't qualify, so on and so forth. Yet the towns just send in one piece of paper that says, and it's approved. Meanwhile, we have to go through papers and papers and papers of putting together a nominal roll to get our dollars. Right? That's just one example. Right? You know, so, and that, in Thunderchild's situation, that's what I can say. The chiefs can speak to their situation.
Basically the same thing.
Would it be fair to characterize then, when you talk about these amendments that come in the multi-year agreements, in your experience then, are these amendments always to the detriment of the First Nations?
Well, it's rolling, as they figure it out, you know, as they figure out their game plan, all of a sudden they introduce legislation, right? They introduce legislation that then have to be part of the amendment. You know, for example, you know, the issue with Pipixi, if you don't mind me talking about this, Headman Richard Arnquell, is that their issue was reporting. You know, the reporting requirement. They didn't have a problem reporting, but INAC wouldn't flow money to Pipixis because it didn't fit their criteria for reporting. Well, right? So you're willing to hold hostage money for a First Nation because of a reporting requirement when they said, we want to continue reporting the way we've been reporting? Why all of a sudden should that reporting requirement change? Right? So those are just some little games that go on. I don't know if it's power, you know, and control. But you cannot operate where government, you know, FTA bands that signed a 5-year, 4-year agreement. That was not too long ago here, a couple of years back. Once they were locked into that agreement, the federal government said, when there were salary increases, you're not entitled to those increases because you're locked into this agreement. Now you're locked into an agreement, but by the way, you have to sign these amendments. So what is it? Right? And nobody's taking, the government is not, Indian Affairs is not answering the questions. Be accountable and responsible and answer what it is we're asking. Because any other person would be asking the same question in regards to why. Justify to us why that's a, don't give us the excuse, it's Treasury Board policy. How many of us heard that? It's Treasury Board policy. It's Treasury Board. That's what Region tells us. And then we start finding out from other First Nations that it's not even policy. Right? So it's very frustrating. And I really thank the chiefs, you know, who are here. Comments at the end? Oh, Larry, go ahead, Chief.
I'd just like to add a little bit more to what Chief Wapas is talking about. The agreements you asked, are they opened up for discussion or negotiations? And no, they're not. Those agreements are one-sided. They're enforceable only one way, and that's on us to meet the new terms and conditions that are put in there. So we have to have that opportunity to even discuss what's being put in there. We're acknowledging unknowns in those documents, legislation that could come down the road that we don't know about. We're acknowledging those legislations and saying, yeah, well, by signing here, we're agreeing to that. You know, so it's one-sided, and I know Yellow Quill is into the 3rd year of a 5-year agreement. What does that 5-year agreement mean when you sign it? Really nothing. You know, it's not enforceable on the government. We've signed it with the intention that here's our funding for the next 5 years. Year 2 comes, well, we get a week notice. Well, you got a new agreement, we have amendments that you have to sign off. We protested, we said no. And, but we do have probably a $2 million salary in our community. And a lot of it is teachers. So we were forced to sign last year. This year again, we signed under duress again, letting them know that we need to have these discussions before, not 2 weeks or a week before the new funding comes out. So the opportunity to even talk about the changes is not even given to us, so that has to change.
So just a final comment from our Vice Chief, Dutch Lara, who we very much appreciate, you know, helping coordinate this and helping us with his staff and his technical and his experience as a leader, you know, from his office.
Yeah. Thank you. And from the First Nations of Saskatchewan, from the Executive Office, we are fully supportive. You've heard the frustrations here on how the ground is constantly shifting in terms of expectations of the Department of Indian Affairs when it comes to what they term accountability. We have those structures in our community. We are accountable to our nations. We have unqualified audits in, out, but still we are subject to additional audits from our Department of Indian Affairs. So we as an organization continue to support the First Nations in Saskatchewan as they advance their struggles collectively. And we will next week be ensuring that this is part of our assembly, which we are having in PA. So, thank you again.
Thank you very much, Vice Chief.
Okay? Okay, thank you all for coming, media. And, the individual chiefs will be available, one-on-one, should you want to scrub them up. Scrum.
Oh, Shannon, go ahead.
Is it called a scrum or a scrub?
Shannon Gould is the counselor for Saddle Lake Cree Nation. Treaty 6.
I just needed to say that on behalf of as a woman and grandmother and mother, that we, if anything, honor the treaties. They were signed. Those are agreements. We talk about these agreements that we're talking about funding, but there's an agreement. When we were signing our agreements, there was no talk like we're having today. And another thing, we're not here to ask for permission or have someone else give authority over us. Like they said before, all the chiefs here, treaties were signed nation to nation. At the end of the day, it's all about our future generations, and that is what we're here for.
We're just trying to make a list.